friends. If you're saying this, it means I'm sick or my family is sick or we're in quarantine to protect you. So I pray that you are doing well and you are healthy and happy. I look forward to when we see each other face to face again. But in the meantime, here's an old sermon I preached on Hebrews chapter 11. Faith shows the reality of what we hope for. It is the evidence of things we cannot see. Through their faith, the people in days of old earned a good reputation. By faith, we understand that the entire universe was formed at God's command, that what we now see did not come from anything that can be seen. It was by faith that Abraham obeyed when God called him to leave home and go to another land that God would give him as in his inheritance. And he went without knowing where he was going. And even when he reached the land God promised him, he lived there by faith, for he was like a foreigner living in tents. And so did Isaac and Jacob, who inherited the same promise. Abraham was confidently looking forward to a city with eternal foundations, a city designed and built by God. It was by faith that even Sarah was able to have a child, though she was barren and too old. She believed that God would keep his promise, and so a whole nation came from this one man who was as good as dead. A nation with so many people that, like the stars in the sky and the sand down the seashore, there's no way to count them. All these people died still believing what God had promised them. They did not receive what was promised, but they saw it all from a distance and welcomed it. They agreed that they were foreigners and nomads here on earth. Obviously, people who say such things are looking forward to a country they can call their own. If they had longed for the country they'd came from, they could have gone back. But they were looking for a better place, a heavenly homeland. All these people earned a good reputation because of their faith. Yet none of them received all that God had promised. For God had something better in mind for us, so that they would not reach perfection without us. Amen. So today I want to ask, what do you hope for? What do you fear? What are you feeling hopeless about today? Well, let me give you a little bit of good news. Here's what Jesus says in John 16. He says, I have told you these things so that in me you may have peace. In this world you will have trouble, but take heart. I have overcome the world. Did you hear that? So Jesus is saying you will have trouble. So if you do not feel frustrated or hopeless about something right now, just wait. It's coming. Because we can't avoid the things that break our faith, that make us feel hopeless or fearful. It applies to us individually. We're each going to have trouble, but it also applies to us as a nation, as a community, as a world. We as humans will have trouble. And Jesus says, yeah, it will come, but take heart. I have overcome the world and I am with you. And that's what we're holding on to today. I asked you earlier, what are you fearing? What makes you hopeless? Or what are you hoping for, but you don't know if it will come true? So hear this good news. We serve a God who wins, who overcomes all these things that plague us. We serve a God who in the darkest moment of Christ's death defeated death itself. We serve a God who promises to walk with us through every step of trouble, of pain, suffering, fear. And that loving, winning, faithful, grace-abounding, powerful God is the center of our faith, and it is the center of your identity as a Christian and my identity as a Christian. So we've got this good news. How do we hold on to it, though? Because, to be honest, when I am just in the thick of it and feeling hopeless and overwhelmed, remembering a verse from John doesn't always come easy. Well, Paul gives us a great example for how we can feel empowered and empower one another when he writes to Hebrews. He does this. He doesn't just say, have faith in God. He tells stories. He tells the stories of our ancestors, of Abraham and Sarah and Isaac and Jacob. And he tells a lot more stories in verses I didn't read because it would have taken forever. And these are stories of people who are important to me because they're in the Bible, but they're not personal. But to his audience, to the audience in the letter to the Hebrews, this is their identity. It is like telling the story of your mom or your dad. It was part of who they were. And so saying these people who are part of you had faith and God saw them through, and they didn't see it all because God is still holding out hope for you. That was empowering. And it should be empowering for us today. But sometimes we need more, right? And so we can learn from Hebrews by following that pattern. We, like Paul, can encourage each other by telling stories. Here's what Frederick Buechner says about faith. He says this: faith is the word that describes the direction our feet start moving when we find that we are loved. Faith is stepping out into the unknown with nothing to guide us but a hand just beyond our grasp. Do you hear that? Faith grows. Faith occurs when we know we are not alone, when we know we are loved, and when we know there are people who've gone before us who are holding out a hand. When we know we have a God out there waiting in the unknown, holding out a hand. And so, we are empowered to faith when we share the stories of our lives with others, when we surround them with our love so they know they are not alone. Do you know the power you hold in simply sharing stories with younger generations? And I'm not talking about stories of that great vacation or how you fell in love or we walked 10 miles uphill to school each day. No, not those stories, but genuine moments that you struggled or felt hopeless in your life and how you overcame it or didn't, and how God walked with you through it. When you struggled with cancer, lost your job, lost your house. If you told the stories of addiction and struggling to overcome it, it would be so empowering to those who struggle with addiction. When your marriage was in jeopardy or fell apart, the story of rebuilding life, the story of grieving lost loved ones or failing yourself. These aren't the things that we talk about over coffee very often. But they are the stories that when we share them with others and are able to say, I am still here. God has given me hope again. There is light at the end of the tunnel. There is more waiting on the other side. It is incredibly empowering. Here's an example from my life. When I was a young woman between Baylor and seminary, I was thinking about leaving Texas, and no one had done that. I was scared to death, facing the unknown, and everyone thought I was crazy because Texans don't leave Texas. And I was moving up to New Jersey where we knew no one and didn't even understand the culture. But one day I was in the car with my mom, and she shared a story that she'd never shared before of when she was young and freshly married and only had one little baby. And she and my dad had to leave Texas and move to Alabama. And she said at first she was angry and scared about this because no one leaves Texas. And she was mad at my dad and uncertain, and they were broke. But when they got to Alabama and settled, she pushed past loneliness, and they went and found a church and joined the church. And at church, she started making friends with other young married couples. She began hanging out with new people from not Texas. Woo! She learned how to cook gumbo, which we cook every year to this day. And she learned freedom and how to build a new life in a tiny apartment with cheap furniture, no money, but the hope of community when she didn't know there would be any. And my mom confessionally said that was the happiest 1 year of my young married life. And she told me she actually cried when it was time to go back to Texas. This story that she didn't tell all the time, probably because it could have been, hurtful to the family they left, but it empowered me. It gave me hope that even though I was entering the great unknown, that I had no money, no furniture, no idea of what I was walking into, there could be hope at the other side of the journey. It let me go, follow God, knowing that my ancestors, my mother, had done the same thing and found blessings for taking the risk. So let me ask you, what story do you have to tell? What story do you not tell because you feel like it reveals weakness? Or you think people don't want to hear it? And what ways do you look back on life or look at your life today and see God's hand at work, but you just don't talk about it? The troubles are coming, and we all need a little more faith. We need to be reminded of God working powerful things among us. I pray you find ways to share your story with others and ways to hear and find hope and faith in the stories of other people. Amen. God, use us. Open our eyes to you at work in our life, even when we have not realized it. Help us to follow you, to seek you, to speak and to listen. Amen. Amen. Be blessed.